as the CEO of the Kenya Institute of Supplies Management, to address you today at this conference under the timely and important theme on supply chain management, emerging trends, challenges and opportunities in Africa. And I want to begin by extending my sincere appreciation to the organizers for the invitation and for creating this platform where we as regulators, those from the academia, industry, policymakers and professionals can be able to engage in meaningful dialogue about the future of supply chains in our continent. The strategic importance of supply chain continue to evolve. We talk about gravitating from operational to strategic balance when it comes to the role that supply chain as a profession should play in our ecosystems. But most fundamentally, for me as a professional, I believe that supply chain is the pulse of progress for any society. And when we talk about supply chain in Africa, I think it is important for us to recognize the magnitude of resources that are expended through procurement and supply chain management. About 17% of the global GDP in Africa, and that translates to about $500 billion annually being expended through public procurement. And that is significant, and as such, having peer-to-peer exchange and experiential conversations is significant as we collectively as Africans seek to provide solutions to the challenges that continue to affect us. And this we do because for Africa, effective supply chain management is very important because it influences how we conduct trade. It affects issues of industrialization, food security, healthcare, delivery, infrastructure development, and regional integration. As such, it is paramount that we also be alive to the emerging issues, the risks that can easily affect humanity. For instance, if we look at what happened in the Strait of Hormuz arising from the crisis in the Middle East, we have now, learning from that experience, solidified the position of supply chain profession. And I think we all agree that supply chains cannot be wished away, looking at the experiences. Because for instance, through the Strait of Hormuz, we have seen about 20 million barrels of crude oil being processed through that strait, and about 90 to 130 ships passing through that strait on a daily basis. And that accounts to about 34% of the global crude oil. And the crisis that we are witnessing across the globe today, when it comes to the fuel prices, is arising from the issues emanating for the management and operations of supply chains within the Strait of Hormuz. A couple of months ago, I think just 1 or 2 months ago, I happened to have been attending a radio interview. And one of the journalists was asking me that how important is supply chain. For us, we think a supply chain professional can be anybody because you can go to the internet, check prices, check products, and acquire them. But I had to talk to him by looking at him from the legs to the head. And I told him that what he looked like depicts in real sense what supply chain is about. Because if it is value, if it is quality, if it is any other thing that you want to consider in that sense, then you then agree that supply chain is very critical. But I was requested to talk about emerging trends in supply chain management. And in the interest of time, I just talk about 4 of them. And I want to begin by talking about the issue of digital transformation as an emerging frontier. The digital revolution is transforming procurement and supply chain operations. And technologies that we know today of machine learning, blockchains, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence, and most fundamentally, The big data, analytics, and cloud computing are enabling organizations to make smarter and faster decisions. These technologies provide real-time visibility, improved forecasting accuracy, reduce costs, and enhance operational efficiency. Organizations that embrace digital transformation will be better positioned to compete in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. In Kenya today, the government has taken a significant step towards modernizing public procurement through the implementation of the electronic government procurement system. And I think the rollout of EGP across the continent of Africa, if you look at Ghana, they have what they call the GANEPS. Rwanda, they have what they call Musio. Yeah? And Kenya today, we are here trying to roll out the EGP system. Rwanda has tested it. In Europe, EGP was first rolled out of EU directives. In Kenya today, we are rolling out EGP out of a presidential directive. But EGP is not a new thing because it was tested 20 years ago. If you look at the history of IBM, they first undertook their EGP regime 20 years ago, and they were able to significantly save close to 15-30% of their budgets. What that portends for Africa is a saving of close to 15 to 20%, and that translates to about 25 billion US dollars to about 100 billion US dollars. So we can be able to see what technology then, in terms of digital transformation, can be able to make our countries realize. Previously in my career, I served as a forensic expert at the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. And what I can say when it comes to digital systems in supply chain management, issues of visibility, tractability, and accountability then becomes possible. And as such, supply chain professionals therefore don't suffer from the generalized condemnation when it comes to accountability lapses, acts of omission and commission. So supply chain professionals in Kenya 2-3 years ago made a resolution that they were going to persuade the government and make policy proposals aimed at the full rollout of the EGPS system, so that they can be accountable for matters within their purview of responsibility. Because traditionally, supply chain professionals have suffered from generalized condemnation, and sometimes for matters that are not within their purview, and most of the time for matters emanating from exogenous factors. So we as KISM, we are supporting the government of Kenya when it comes to the rollout of the EGP system. We have created a pool of experts, about 100 TOTs who are trained as experts to support the rollout of the EGP system. We are deliberately investing in experiential exchange with peer institutions in the continent of Africa. Just 2 weeks ago, we successfully rolled out an executive CISU program in collaboration with the Institute of Public Procurement of Rwanda, where we were training executives from across the continent of Africa. And through that nexus, Kenya is also able to learn from other African countries, and the other African countries are also able to learn from Kenya. So that then, based on past experiences and challenges as a country, we are able to then position ourselves effectively, efficiently, and robustly, so that the challenges we face with the rollout of the EGP system, we then adopt a solution-centric approach to overcome those challenges as we move forward. So at KISM, we are also very deliberate now in curating a tech-centric topics as part of content development that we deliver to our members. We are very deliberate in also curating technology-related topics, because we take note that the emerging technologies are moving at a higher pace than the professionals when it comes to the competencies, skills, and relevance of content that we then deliver to our members in terms of continuous professional development. But therein lies an opportunity, noting that most of the membership here from universities, therein lies an opportunity for professional bodies and universities and learning institutions in general to come together to develop content that also meets the emerging needs around technology. And I'm happy that through the Commission for University Education, KISM, is collaborating, coordinating, and cooperating when it comes to the development of content for the supply chain professionals in our country. And I think we have a chance to work with the University of Nairobi and all the other universities in this space so that we can be able to make a contribution. The second issue that I want to talk to is the issues of sustainability and green supply chains. Environmental, social, and governance considerations are becoming central to supply chain strategy. Businesses are increasingly expected to reduce carbon emissions, promote ethical sourcing, minimize waste, and support sustainable production practices. Africa has a unique opportunity to build sustainable supply chains from the ground up by integrating environmental stewardship into economic development initiatives. And I think on this we have to lead as examples. At KISM today, as an accounting officer, I've made it very, very clear that we have to ensure that when we take people to conferences, the hotels that we contract, the conference facilities that we contract, must also be subscribing to the ESG requirements. The continent of Africa, for those people who have been in the development world, initially I worked for the German Development Agency as an advisor on procurement and audits. And I had a chance to be seconded to the governments of Ghana and the government of South Africa to support them when it comes to building the institutional legal framework governing public procurement. And one of the things that we realized when we interacted with the African Development Bank is that they had made a policy pronouncement for the continent of Africa and all African countries to domesticate sustainability policies. And I'm happy to report that in Kenya today, we're just finalizing through the National Treasury the development of the sustainability policy. But there again lies an opportunity for universities, learning institutions, and professional development, professional bodies. Whenever new policies are nurtured and developed, there is usually a window for capacity development. But most of us as professional bodies and learning institutions, we leave the policy to the regulators, to the custodians of policy. And yet, there is an opportunity for us to work together, again in supporting our governments so that the aspirations in those policies can be able to make a difference for our countries. The third point that I want to talk about is the issue of supply chain resilience. I think recent disruptions have taught us that efficiency alone is not enough. Supply chains must be resilient. Organizations are diversifying suppliers, strengthening local sourcing, investing in risk management systems, and building contingency plans to withstand future shocks. Resilience, therefore, has become a strategic priority rather than an optional consideration. And what that means, therefore, is that beyond the systems, we need to look at the people. Stronger resilience is built when we have supply chain professionals who are all round. We train professionals with a specialty in logistics, supply chain, and strategic business, but how else do we expose these professionals to be all round so that they pick facets, pieces here and there of experiences that are then able to enable institutions to be stronger, because building stronger supply chains has also a correlation of building stronger supply chain professionals. And as such, I think being deliberate in even curating policies, revising and improving policies, both at institutional and societal level, to build and entrench features of resilience is critical. The last point that I would want to talk about on that pillar of my presentation would be on the issue of regional integration as an emerging frontier in supply chain trends. So regional integration and cross-border trade, especially with the buyers on the African continental free trade area, presents a historic opportunity to strengthen intra-Africa trade. Efficient supply chains will be essential for realizing the full potential of this agreement. Improved logistic networks, harmonized regulations, digital trade systems, and stronger transport infrastructure will facilitate movement of goods and services across borders. We take note that through the African continental free trade area, we have the gesture from about 54 out of 55 AU member countries. So far it has been ratified by about 48 countries, and this particular trade area brings together about 1.3 to 1.4 billion people, and that translates, the economies collectively put together within that free trade area is about 3.4 trillion of GDP. So what that means is that there is enormous opportunity for supply chain professionals. The unique challenge that is there is that if you look at the continent of Africa, when it comes to professionalization of supply chain practice, you don't compare efforts with efforts, because the institutional, legal, and administrative framework, for instance, in Kenya, if you compare the same with Uganda and Rwanda, you'll be able to realize that they're completely different. For instance, Kenya, as KISM, we have a mandate to register, license, train, discipline, and regulate supply chain professionals. Over the last 2 years, we've been able to grow our membership by 74%. So today in Kenya, KISM has 28,000 members, and it is the fastest growing professional body in Kenya. If you do a comparative study, for instance, with South Africa, you realize that they don't have a similar institutional framework with Kenya. And if you carry that one forward when it comes to comparative studies on proficiencies, you realize that even in terms of proficiencies, there are barriers within the continent of Africa. You can't compare the content taught to a supply chain professional within the professional qualifications. For example, you're doing a CPSPK program. If you compare that content with another proficiency in another country in the continent of Africa, you'll realize that they're not the same. And therefore, I want to congratulate the Panafrican Symposium on Logistics, Supply Chain, and Strategic Business, bringing together all these universities. I think there lies a unique opportunity again to develop content that is uniform, to leverage on the Africa free trade area, to work with professional bodies, so that then when it comes to labor import and export, it is possible for the continent of Africa. That notwithstanding, many African countries continue to face challenges relating to transport networks, storage facilities, ports, energy supply chain, logistics, infrastructure, among others. These limitations increase costs and also reduce competitiveness. So relatedly is the issue of skills and talent development, which I've talked about. The supply chain profession is evolving rapidly, yet the skills available in the market often lag behind industry requirements. We have a lot of bureaucracies and red tapes that we need to collapse among countries, so that as we talk about the economic aspirations of a unifying currency, for example, we also need to talk about a unifying curriculum for supply chain professionals. I had a chance when I was still working with the German government to take this conversation with the Prime Cabinet Secretary of the Republic of Kenya, and he challenged us to develop a position paper so that through the EU framework, we can be able to then rally supply chain professionals across the continent of Africa to deal with some of these challenges. And I extend an olive branch to work with the universities who are in this caucus so that we can be able to make that a legacy contribution for the continent of Africa. There is a growing need for professionals who possess expertise in digital technologies, data analytics, risk management, sustainability, and strategic procurement. Universities and professional bodies must therefore work together to bridge this gap. The next thing that I want to talk about as I come closer to talking about the opportunities for Africa, and then I will shortly conclude. I was not told how many hours or minutes I have, is on regulatory and policy barriers, inconsistent regulations. If you look at the space of logistics, in Kenya, you look at the policy and legal framework, logistics is treated as part of administration. It is not treated as part of supply chain. You look at clearing and forwarding, it is not hyped to be part of procurement. But if you look at the law, Public Procurement and Asset Disposal Act, it creates supply chain functions. So there is a gamble there. Sometimes we're talking about procurement department, another time we're talking about supply chain department, and yet supply chain itself is a pipe, isn't it? It is a pipe. So all these other things, logistics is subsumed there, distribution is there, inventory management is there, warehousing, and all these things. So I think there is a chance for us as technocrats, as professionals, to be deliberate in even curating policy advisory papers to our governments, so that then there is a commonality of understanding of what supply chain is. We rely on the CIPS UK principles, but I think there is an opportunity for Africans to deliberate and come up with African-centric solutions. And in terms of building economies of scale, in terms of creating opportunities for supply chain professionals, my personal view is that housing supply chain in the understanding of what supply chain is, by building coherence, is good for us. So that then we can even be able to create more employment opportunities in the long run for supply chain professionals. So inconsistent regulations, lengthy custom procedures, bureaucratic processes can hinder efficient trade and supply chain operations, and therefore government and stakeholders must continue efforts to create more enabling business environment. And then finally is the issue of climate change and environmental risks. Extreme weather events, drought, floods, and other climate-related disruptions increasingly affect agricultural production, transportation networks, and supply chain continuity. Climate resilience must therefore be integrated in supply chain planning and decision-making. All these notwithstanding, ladies and gentlemen, I think there lies opportunities for Africa, and despite these challenges, Africa's future remains promising. We were having a debate the other day with another scholar from Germany, and he was telling me how the Ukraine war affected the oil and gas industry in Germany. And we proceeded to talk about the crisis in the Middle East. And we were wondering whether the next point of global disruptions may just be Africa. We are not being prophets of doom, but we are being realistic professionals who must then take responsibility, support our governments, support our institutions, to be proactive in coming up with mitigation measures. If the port of Hormuz has created the global crisis it has created, what would be the impact of any crisis happening around the canals in Africa? The Suez Canal, for instance, what would happen? The port of Good Hope, what would happen? Yeah, because in Africa we have about 4 of them. that if anything was to happen, it would affect the entire world. So as such, as supply chain professionals, as scholars in learning institutions, it is important that learning from the experiences from other parts of the world, we can also be able to advise our governments when it comes to designing all supply chains. I think investing in strategic reserves, for example, when it comes to our food stocks, when it comes to the oil and gas, is critical. At one time, when I was still working with the Anti-Corruption Agency, I learned about the strategic food reserves when the maize crisis happened in our country. And we made recommendations to the government, and we are very, very grateful that the government of Kenya took our recommendations for the Strategic Food Reserve Oversight Board and the National Cereals and Produce Board to be segregated. And that's what culminated to the government creating what we call in Kenya today the warehouse receipting system, and the collapse of the Strategic Food Reserve Oversight Board, with that mandate being given to solidify the mandate of the National Cereals and Produce Board and the warehouse receipting system. So it is possible for us as supply chain professionals to move from giving policy recommendations to giving actionable policy recommendations that helps the countries to grow and move to the next level. Our continent has a young and dynamic population. Our continent has expanding markets. Our continent has increasingly digital regimes being adopted. We have abundant natural resources and a growing entrepreneurial energy. To capitalize on these trends, we must focus on 1, investing in supply chain infrastructure. Number 2 is strengthening professional capacity and skills development. Number 3 is accelerating digital transformation, promoting local manufacturing and value addition, enhancing regional trade and collaboration, and supporting innovation and entrepreneurship. We at KISM, as the professional body responsible for regulating and promoting the procurement and supply chain profession in Kenya, we remain committed to advancing excellence, professionalism, ethical standards, and continuous learning. And I want to repeat continuous learning because we operate in a very dynamic ecosystem. Our members have diverse needs. Our members continue to give us feedback, and they continue to criticize us positively. And as such, we are also able to improve as we endeavor to serve with diligence, excellence, and commitment. We recognize that the future of our profession depends on strong partnerships among academia, industry, government, and professional institutions. And that is why when I was called for this program, I didn't hesitate to come. I therefore encourage our universities and training institutions to continuously align curricula with emerging industry needs and technological advancements. Together, we can nurture a new generation of supply chain professionals who are innovative, ethical, globally competitive, and ready to lead Africa's transformation. As we come to the end of my presentation, my call to action is that as we deliberate during this conference, I encourage that we go beyond today's challenges and envision the supply chains Africans will need tomorrow. We must build systems that are resilient in times of disruption, sustainable for future generations, technologically driven and data informed, inclusive and supportive of local enterprises, and finally capable of facilitating regional and global trade. The future of Africa's economic transformation will depend significantly on how we effectively manage our supply chains. And in closing, therefore, I wish to reiterate that supply chain management is the pulse of the progress of our society, and Africa stands at a pivotal role By embracing innovation, investing in people, strengthening collaboration, and building resilient systems, we can unlock tremendous opportunities for growth and prosperity across the continent. Finally, is to indicate that procurement is where value begins, supply chains are where values flows, and leadership is where and what turns that value into a lasting impact. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. May God bless you. May God bless you.